So I heard an interesting podcast this week, and I wanted to start with the question that was asked at the beginning of the podcast, not the podcast information itself. So the question was, who likes to be coerced? Who likes to be coerced? Is there any kind of coercion that is good? Bribery?
If it's a good bribe.
If it's a good bribe, like candy for chocolate for... So everyone in this room is telling me they have never coerced their kid before. So do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? So we don't love the idea of coercion. Why don't we typically love the idea of coercion? Now, in my vocabulary, the euphemism for coercion is encouragement. But let's just start with that. Why don't we typically like being coerced or feeling like we're being coerced into something? You're pushed into something that you don't want to do. So primarily you don't want to do it, you're being pushed to do it. Why else? Didn't do anything about it. It's just they obviously did not hook it into the TriCaster. Is it working up there? Yes. Oh, well, then I will go back up there. I was going to schmooze amongst the people. But now, so the whole point of the sound is working. It's not going through the thing that goes into the live stream so people on television cannot hear. And the internet, no one uses television. So, pushed into something that we don't like. Why else? Being bullied. Coercion is a power ploy, and bullying is a power manipulative kind of thing. No, you don't agree. I'm getting a
Well, it has a very negative connotation.
Which is coercion does. Right.
It's connotatively, it's a very negative word, but as I said, being coerced can also be encouraged to do something, to try something. It doesn't have to be a negative thing.
Okay, so coercion doesn't necessarily always have to be as negative as it sounds. The word itself sounds negative. Right? I'm being forced to do something I don't want to do. I'm going to give you anyone else want to tell me why we don't like, yes, why don't you like to be coerced, Jeff?
Well, first of all, I would say that coercion is a bad sounding word, but sometimes if you're coerced into something that you really should do,
Right.
it can have a positive effect.
Right, so you can be coerced into something that is really in your best interest or that you should do, you just don't know it yet. So there are times when maybe it's okay. What is one other aspect of coercion, though, that we don't like or doesn't feel Jewish to us, if we're going to bring it into a Jewish context? Power manipulation, maybe the loss of free will, maybe the loss of being able to make our own choices. So if I tell you, if you remember from Exodus about Shabbat, the Torah teaches that God says to Moses, tell the children of Israel to observe the Shabbat, don't work on the Shabbat, don't kindle a fire, and if you do, mot yumat, you will be put to death. Is that coercion? Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, the mitzvot are sometimes very coercive. Now, you could say, I have a choice not to observe Shabbat. I have that choice, which means I'm choosing mot yumat, to be put to death. It didn't ultimately, obviously, become a capital offense, but it was in the Torah a capital offense. For those of us who like the Karaite Jews, it was a capital, it's an inside joke just for the three of us, and because you were courageous to sit in the front row, our circle is tight. Yes, if you read the text of the Torah, that's how it's stated. So you could choose not to keep the Shabbat, but you would be choosing death. Okay? So, coercion is really all in the eye of the beholder. And meaning if you're a parent or if you're God or if you're Moses, it can be typically used. In this week's Parsha, Balak, the king of what we now call Jordan, but in the Torah was called Moab, like Moab, Utah, Moab, same name, is this story of a guy, Balaam, and if you watched our 1 minute of Torah, I talked a little bit about this and said we would expand upon it tomorrow, who is coerced, probably paid, but coerced by Balak to curse the Israelites who are about to enter the land of Edom because, go from Edom to Moab, because Balak knows that the Jews are bad. And I mean like bad, like bad. Like you don't mess with them because their God will whoop you. And so Balak, sort of like the Pharaoh, wants nothing to do with these people. And so Balaam goes out is coerced into cursing them. And instead of cursing them, we know he turns to a donkey who talks to him on the way to cursing them, and then actually the donkey and the angel who's with the donkey coerces him into not cursing them and into blessing them. And as I pointed out on our 1 minute of Torah YouTube video, he says this great 2 verses, these great words. Balaam says, his free will is triggered, actually. This is where coercion can actually backfire. And you can do the right thing instead of the wrong thing. Because that's, by the way, the punchline. Coercion is all about what the end is. And the means don't always seem to justify the end. But for the people who said, the one person in particular who said, if the result is good, then the coercion isn't necessarily negative. He says, how can I damn those who God has not damned? How can I doom when God has not doomed them? As I see them from the mountaintops, gaze on them from the heights, there is a people that dwells alone. These Israelites, they dwell alone. That's the translation. And so many commentaries play on this idea of dwelling alone. What does it mean to be part of a people who dwell alone? And the Hebrew word, by the way, is levadav. The people are alone. And one of the things that we know from this week's Parsha is that the status of the Israelites will be forever part of this group that doesn't necessarily fit in. And this goes back to coercion, being negative or positive. One of the things that we learn is that if we are always going to be cast into the role of the other, we are going to often be coerced in a negative way by society, by values, by laws that don't necessarily apply to us as Jews into being more like everyone else. There is a societal coercion that takes place, a societal coercion that is at play for the Jewish people because we are constantly being told that we are different, that we are on the outside, that we are particular, that we are not part of the universal picture. And that because we are different, we should coercively, sometimes implicitly, sometimes explicitly, give up our Jewish values, our Jewish identities, our Jewish souls in order to fit in. The positive, however, is the role that the community plays, the Jewish community plays. Our ancestors, our Torah, our family can, our parents in particular, coerce us into doing the things that are different than what the society does. For example, how many kids feel forced to go to Sunday school, become a bar bat mitzvah, become a confirmand, go to camp? Well, most of them don't feel forced to go to camp, but maybe in the beginning they do. Right? We have to, in order to combat the aloneness, the separateness, the levadav of being Jewish, coercion plays a very important role. Yes, I am about to have my 3rd kid's bat mitzvah. There is coercion involved in that, right? She wants the party just like every other kid does. There is no implicit, wonderful, well, at least that she's sharing with me, although I don't think she would because it would be too pleasing to me. There's no implicit, reading from the Torah being part of the Jewish, it's there, but it's not explicit. Like, we have to coerce our community into not being like the other, into being comfortable with, or at least tolerant of the fact that we are levadav, that we are different. It's a coercive act to say to a Jewish community, in a positive sense, because we're keeping, remember, the eyes on the ends, not necessarily, on the means to the end, that dwelling alone is about particularism. It's about heritage. It's about connecting to the past and to the future. that there is both a blessing and a curse inherent in Balaam's first oracle, where he has that moment of saying, these people are different, they're separate. On this Shabbat, what I want you to think about is this idea of not just coercion, but about the positive implications, the positive ways in which we always have to push ourselves and our kids and our grandkids into plugging into Judaism by basically telling them, you're different than everyone else. You're separate. You're levado. I think that our society is in a place now where we've gone through back and forth, everyone's equal, everyone's the same, no, there's diversity, no, we're the same, no, there's diversity. We are different. I have 3,000 years of evidence here to tell you levado is not such a bad thing. The bad part is when the society, when the culture outside of us separates and excludes us. But there is nothing wrong with, call it coercion, us saying to our kids and to our grandkids and even to ourselves, it's okay to be different. It's acceptable to be different. And sometimes we don't have to threaten death. Sometimes celebrating Shabbat with your family is more important in a world and society that doesn't care about Shabbat, our Shabbat. Sometimes becoming a bar bat mitzvah is more important than dance or soccer or football or whatever. No Jewish kids play football, of course. Whatever the sport is. Sometimes spending 4 weeks, our big trip, Israel, kids came back this past Monday, safe and sound. Sometimes spending 4 weeks in Israel with peers is more important than spending 4 weeks at Starbucks or even in summer school. We have to be master manipulators with our kids and our grandkids. Master in giving them enough independence and enough leeway to make their own choices. But let's be honest. This idea of kids choosing whatever they want, wherever they want, however they want, it's getting old. And it's annoying. And it's not very Jewish. Sorry. So on this Shabbat, I want you to think about that. And I want you to think about maybe coercing yourselves a little bit more into learning and Jewish identity building and study and connectivity to each other and to your community. I think what you will find is that dwelling alone is not such a bad thing. And that ultimately we would learn from Balaam is that doing the right thing, even if you're coerced to do the wrong thing, that doing ultimately the right thing by blessing the Israelites is what both identifies us as separate, but also reminds us that part of that separateness is the blessing itself. When he says, Ma tovu halecha Yaakov, the famous prayer that is in this week's Parsha, how goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. What he's saying is that Jewish particularism, Jewish exceptionalism, if you will, and many of us feel the same way about being Americans too, right? But it's a little bit different. America's not quite as old a concept, but there are a lot of similarities. That Jewish particularism, Jewish separatism are not such bad things. That we really can find fulfillment for ourselves and for our kids and for our community and for the future by nudging and pushing and helping them to make the right decisions. In conclusion, I've been very nostalgic this last month. And this is really part of what the outcomes, if you will, of coercive behavior is. I got to spend three Shabbats at camp. I took advantage of Rabbi Keller's being here for a few more weeks, and Rabbi Rosen was kind enough to fill in, and I get to go back to camp in a couple of weeks. And to see the end result of seeds that were planted, I'm going to not use the word coercion anymore. I'm going to now go to encouragement. To see kids who we funded scholarships for to go to camp now become the counselors and the unit heads. To see kids who were babies when I got here. Now, my baby as a Ozo, as a CIT, my daughter Gabrielle, running the place. To know that next Shabbat I'll be in Detroit to officiate at a wedding for, I think, my second bar mitzvah kid here at Beth Israel, who's now getting married. To see the kids get off the plane from Israel, now almost in that age where they were preschoolers when I got here. We were very bold in being coercive about bar mitzvah requirements and religious school requirements and confirmation requirements. On the other side of all of that is a beautiful sight to see. Connected kids, building community, learning Torah, setting foot in Israel, running our camp program. It's been very nostalgic to go the 3 of the last 4 weeks to camp, because one of the beautiful things about being in a congregation for 13 years, not only do I get to do weddings now for kids whose bar mitzvahs I did, but I get to see at camp, and I know in our religious school and in other facets, that these mean, strict rules that we put into place, expectations that we had, are now bearing fruit. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to see. So I'm with you. Coercion is not such a bad thing always. We don't want to lose our free will, and we certainly don't want to lose our ability to be autonomous decision makers. But sometimes it's very, very good to be nudged, because the end result may be delayed. We may not see it for several years. But to sit at a Shabbat service with a guy who was in 5th grade when I got here, who's now off to rabbinic school, spending his first Shabbat, Jackie and Lance's son, at services for 3 consecutive weeks, fills my heart. We've done good by being a very coercive congregation. Shabbat Shalom.